Hey gamers, Foxfire's here, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a video game review and gameplay of Vermintide 2. So if you're not familiar with Vermintide, this is sort of like the Warhammer 40k version of Left 4 Dead. So Left 4 Dead being the zombie game that's, really popular at LAN parties. It's a cooperative game. And so Vermintide is the same, only instead of fighting zombies in say like an urban landscape, you're going to be fighting largely rats and some Chaos Warriors in Vermintide 2 in more of a fantasy landscape. Okay, so the overall concept of Vermintide 1 and 2 are the same, but what are the differences? What is it that Vermintide 2 brings to the table above and beyond Vermintide 1? So one of those things would be Prettier Maps. So there were several points during the game where I was just, stopped and wowed by how pretty some of the scenes were. And that's kind of counterintuitive considering, you're supposed to be fighting waves of rat and Chaos Warrior swarms. You don't have time to really appreciate how pretty the maps are. One thing that it does kind of take a little bit away from is because some of the maps are so pretty, it takes away from that horror element feel, as you might expect from Left 4 Dead, or as oftentimes I got the vibe of in Vermintide 1. In Vermintide 1 especially, perhaps, it was, you're like in these dungeony kinds of horror house, really dark, kind of a gritty kind of an environment. You feel that horror element, that horror landscape. And in Vermintide 2, it's much more of a fantasy landscape. And so take that as you will. They're kind of just two different flavors of something, and some of you might be expecting more along the horror line of things, some of you might be expecting more along the fantasy side of things. And the maps themselves are a lot more diverse. So in Vermintide 1, there was a lot of, hey, put these barrels here. And in Vermintide 2, it's more than just, hey, put these barrels here. There are also puzzles and a lot of other mechanics as well. One of the other key differences between Vermintide 2 and Vermintide 1 is the tiers of mobs. So in Vermintide 1, it was very much, you have these trash mobs that you can kill in one hit. You have these Roman Legion looking rats that are bigger with, reach weapons, and they take a few more hits. And then you had large bosses. The occasional special mob in between as well, one that throws gas or hooks you and drags you backwards. Again, similar to the special zombies in Left 4 Dead. But so for the most part, it was always, one shot kills pretty much everything. And in Vermintide 2, that is, vastly different. So you've got some trash mobs that, you're just going to be able to one hit, but there's lots more tiers, and so sprinkled in there, you've got these Chaos Warriors, you've got various different types of mobs that it's going to take more than just one hit in order to be able to kill them. And that's one of the things that going from Vermintide 1 to Vermintide 2 requires a bit of readjustment in how you play, because it's not like you're just going to be able to swing or, just shoot through a wave of mobs and expect them to go down. No, in fact, they're a lot more hardy, and so you're going to have to rely a fair bit more on, say, blocking, because they're going to survive your first attack and they're going to get in some of their own, and so you've got to be ready to block that and then go in for your second sweep. There are plenty of times when, I or my friends thought something was dead. It would go down, it would be staggered, it would fall over, and then actually it's just been knocked down, and that actually it gets back up as soon as you've run by, and then it swings at you from the back. And so overall, like, the added tiers of these different mobs added a layer of challenge to the game. And with those added tiers of mobs, it, requires a bit more of a dynamic play style. One of the things that you might notice that's different between Vermintide 1 and Vermintide 2 is that there's been a complete overhaul of the user interface. And so this is everything from how you go about salvaging things and crafting things, where you're going to go to change your career spec, switch talents out, which I'll touch on in just a second. But so the user interface itself, it took just a little bit of time to get used to. It was actually pretty intuitive, so while it might look intimidating at first, it's actually pretty straightforward. And so on the note of careers and talents, in Vermintide 2, each character that you play, you aren't restricted to having essentially like one class, one spec. There are 3 different kinds of careers that you can choose from for each character that are slightly different in their playstyle, kind of similar to World of Warcraft. Say, for example, if you're playing a priest in World of Warcraft, you've got Holy, Discipline, and Shadow Priest. And each one of those plays slightly differently. They have different abilities, different strengths, and different weaknesses. And it's the same for the careers in Vermintide 2. And so this was actually a really nice way to be able to diversify the kinds of play styles that you can have and the strategies that you can have in the game. So this was actually a nice kind of a diversification that allows you to tailor the character more towards how you want to play. And then on top of that, they have talents, different talents for each career, again, much like World of Warcraft. So if you're playing Shadow Priest, you're going to have a Shadow Priest talent tree that you're going to go through it and be able to spec, and the same for the other careers. One of the big differences between Vermintide 1 versus 2, in Vermintide 2, there's a lot more gear that you get. In Vermintide 1, you may recall that when you completed a mission, depending on how many loot die you got, that would kind of increase your chances of getting a higher quality piece of loot at the end. It was kind of one of those things where it would roll a bunch of dice digitally into a pan, and there would be almost kind of like a slots bar on the side to go up based on the number of successes, and the higher up you got, the better the gear would be. And you would only get one piece of loot for completing that mission. And it could be a piece of gear for any character. So, in Vermintide 1, you might be playing Sienna and end up getting a piece of gear for Kruber or Carillion, etc. And so that made gearing up in Vermintide 1 a lot more RNG based and a lot slower going in terms of progression. In Vermintide 2, you have access to a ton more gear, especially early on. So every time you get an achievement in the game, when you go back into the challenges menu, you'll be able to find that you can claim a chest reward for each one of these challenges that you've completed. And so that gives you access to tons of loot crates from pretty early on from the beginning. And for each mission that you complete, you also have access to getting one of these crates, and the more loot dice that you get, etc., the higher the chance of a higher tier crate that you can have that you're going to get. And so the more loot dice that you get, or the more tomes that you get, etc., that's going to increase the bar for raising yourself up to that next quality tier of crate, so that you will go from, say, a green crate to a blue crate, for example, if you get a bunch of loot dice. And the loot die are obtained from killing different types of bosses. And when you open these crates, instead of just one piece of random loot being in it, it's going to give you 3 pieces of loot specifically for the character that you're on when you open that crate. And so it's much easier to get gear for the specific character that you want, and not just gear for that character, but a lot more of that gear. Not just one piece, but 3 pieces per crate. And this is really nice because it allows gear progression for the character that you want. One thing that I will say about Vermintide 2 that is similar to Vermintide 1 is that you've just gotten the hang of things, and you've just really kind of started to hit your stride when the game is over. It's a pretty short game, so start to finish, even including the times that you're playing around with the crafting and playing around with the quest log and testing out, different weapons and things on the targeting dummies, all of that, I found that I still beat the game in less than 10 hours. So it seemed like the game was quite short. You beat all the missions, and of course you can still go back and do those on greater difficulty. But for me, doing it on a harder difficulty, that's got some appeal, but not like, a massive appeal. And so as much as I love the game, I would have loved to have seen there to be more to it. And of course, I think that they know that, because they do make there be more to it as downloadable content for additional purchase. So for example, with Vermintide 2, there are, beyond the collector's edition content, there are 2 additional kind of downloadable content packs. And each one of those is an additional £7. And so I think they kind of know that. They're like, hey, did you like this game? Did you really enjoy it and start to hit your stride? Well, give us an extra £7 and we'll let you play some additional maps. It's one of those things that I kind of like less with this generation of games in general. There seems to be all kinds of additional purchases, microtransactions, and, downloadable content kinds of things that cost extra money that, originally, several years ago, you would have expected to have just been included with the initial purchase of the game. One of the other things that I found to be a bit different is the character play itself. And so I'm going to get more into that in detail in my next video. But, just kind of touching on some of the things that we've already discussed. Of course, having those different careers, having those different talents, you've got a lot more variety that's going to make playing those characters a bit different in Vermintide 1 compared to Vermintide 2. Overall, it's a really fun game. And again, just like Vermintide 1, it's a great party game, a great co-op, a ton of fun to play with your friends, and I would highly recommend it. And lastly, you may have noticed that recently my channel has expanded with sci-fi and fantasy book review and reenactment content. So the reenactments are these really fun and lighthearted ways to reenact a book. And these books are from a selection that we're reading for the Oxford Sci-Fi and Fantasy Book Club. And they're also from a selection that Orion and Gallant's publishers that I've been able to get an advance copy for ahead of publication. And so this is kind of like beta access in the video game world. So if you like sci-fi and fantasy and you want a sneak peek of upcoming titles, you can find a link in the end cards. And as always, thanks for watching, gamers. I'm Foxbyers, and this has been a video on Vermintide 2 review and a bit of gameplay. Stay tuned for the next videos, guys. Thanks.